Hello and welcome to another episode of the Practical Stoic Podcast. So today I have for you part 8 of our 9-part masterclass series with Kai Whiting and Leonidas Konstantakos, authors of Being Better, Stoicism for a World Worth Living In. And you can get that book via a link in the show notes, and I highly recommend that you do. And they're already working on book number 2, and so that's very exciting. But today we're focusing all about Stoic Cosmopolitanism. So many of you will know what that is. Many of you will have absolutely no idea. That's fine, because in this conversation today, you're getting the first 30 to 40 or 50 minutes of our conversation in that meetup. Now, if you do want to hear the rest of the conversation that we had with a Q&A between Kai and Leo and myself and some Patreon supporters, then you can go to patreon.com, patreon.com/Simon J.E. Drew, and there you can get the rest of that conversation. And at this point, I should probably also mention to you guys that there is some pretty exciting news and some pretty exciting changes coming up very shortly to the Practical Stoic podcast. So keep an eye out, keep an ear out, because what's going to happen is likely next week, you'll notice that the Practical Stoic podcast has been turned into the Walled Garden podcast, and we'll have a completely new, as I said, a new name and a new brand. So you will see a different image there. So don't worry, I'm still kind of delivering the interviews that you guys have come to know and love, but it will be under that different brand. And this really represents quite a massive shift, I guess a transformation in the evolution of the Practical Stoic podcast. I'm very, very excited to be announcing a whole bunch of cool things that are coming up in the following months. So as I said, just keep a watch out for that, and I'm really looking forward to bringing you guys on this new adventure that I'm initiating. And that's probably all I'll say for now. There's some very exciting conversations coming up, and I want to involve all of you as well. But we'll come to that when it arrives. So other than that, I do want to mention that if you would like to attend the very final masterclass series that we're doing with Kai Whiting and Leo Konstantakos, then please jump over to patreon.com/Simon J.E. Drew, sign up there, and you can come to the very final meetup this Sunday at 5:30 a.m. My time, but for most of you, it'll probably be Saturday in the afternoon or evening, and we'd love to see you there. This week we are finally discussing Stoicism and God. So Kai and Leo are going to be bringing a lot of wisdom to that conversation and enlightening us to the way that the Stoics perceived God and the principle of God, the mystery of God, all of this sort of stuff. So it's going to be a really thrilling conversation, and we'd love to see you there. So anyway, thanks for putting up with all of this preamble, but without any further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our conversation with Kai Whiting and Leonidas Konstantakos on Stoic Cosmopolitanism. Cool. So we are here for our second last meetup, masterclass, whatever you want to call it, with Kai Whiting and Leonidas Konstantakos. And guys, thank you so much for sticking it out this far. It's been a really wonderful experience, and I'm excited for today's conversation around cosmopolitanism, unless I've got that wrong. And then next 2 weeks from now, we have a discussion on Stoicism and God, which is going to be equally fascinating. So I wanted to give a little bit of a brief breakdown of my own experience with this idea of cosmopolitanism before we dive in, and maybe that can be a starting point, and you guys can tell me where you think I've gone wrong and where you think I've gone right, or if I'm just getting everything wrong. So I think when I think of this idea of cosmopolitanism, the reason I shared that quote with you guys from Seneca in the email for registering, where he's talking about, as long as I can kind of trace the stars and the moon and, watch where they go, and I can, commune with what is divine and all of this sort of stuff. He says, what does it matter which ground I stand on? Sorry, I just let Eric in. And so Seneca, to me, when he writes that sort of stuff, it seems to me like he has a different kind of view. He has this deep feeling of being at home within the cosmos that he's in. And the Stoic literature is full of this sort of stuff. And I think that a lot of times, the way that I have felt is that we can often get, yes, very technical in our trying to understand this principle of cosmopolitanism, but to me, it screams of something that requires a deep feeling and a deep connection, not necessarily an intellectual understanding, even though that will inevitably help you. Like there's that quote, nothing's more practical than a good theory, right? Like it's important to understand these things, but nonetheless, it says to me that there's something that we need to actually feel in terms of our connection with the cosmos. And so there are a few things I think, you know how sometimes you have those moments in life where an idea finally makes sense, or you think something, you think, that's very important that I just realized that, you know. One of those moments for me was actually only a couple of years ago when I kind of started thinking, hang on, maybe it's true that so many of the problems that we deal with in the world come from this attitude that we believe that nature is separate from humanity. It's like humanity and then it's nature. And Alan Watts, he said, you know, we often think we came into this world, but actually in reality, we came out of it, right? You know, we're made of the same stuff as everybody else in this world and in this cosmos. You know, we are so much a part of this earth, of this cosmos, that to say that we came into it is just incorrect on every possible way. We came out of this world, you know, we are not separate from nature, but we are very much intertwined with nature. Things like that were actually really big, massive shifts for me in the way that I saw myself and in the way that I saw the world around me. You know, even I remember having a conversation with Kai once where I kind of said, you know, it doesn't make sense to me that every single creature in nature has some sort of inbuilt guide that shows it exactly how to live its life in the way that that creature should live. But we don't have that as human beings. You know, we don't have that thing within us that guides us, that is kind of from the whole cosmos that kind of was put in there. To me, it has to do with this idea of the divine spark of logos that the Stoics so much talk about. Actually, I was just listening to a lecture from Jordan Peterson where he said something interesting just before this, and I thought I'll bring it into it. He said, there is a divinity within us that reflects divinity itself being divinity of the whole, right? And so I understand that my own cosmopolitanism, feeling connected with the earth and with nature and everything and with the cosmos, has taken on lately, you'd probably say, a little bit of the Christian worldview, a little bit of the Taoist worldview, a little bit of the Stoic worldview, but I'm trying to find the commonalities that help me to feel what I believe Seneca felt when he wrote those lines, what does it matter which ground I stand on? You know, that feeling of at home, being at home within the cosmos. And so all of that, you know, mixed with a lot of trying to get a deeper self-understanding has really led me to feeling that, yeah, that there's something to this idea of the cosmopolitan worldview of trying to connect yourself with what is greater. And the last thing that I'll say is, you know, even things like, you know, when we hear about how Socrates, you know, was like, don't call me a citizen of this nation or that, you know, call me a citizen of the cosmos or whatever. You know, I'm probably ruining that line, but essentially that was the gist, I believe. And when he says, you know, like the difference between him and other people was that he believed that this daemon in his mind, you know, would tell him when he shouldn't do something. And when it told him he shouldn't do something, he just didn't do it, right? Like a lot of us can immediately throw away the daemon and be, oh, this is just a superstition or something like that. We have the rational scientific worldview. I actually think, what the hell was he doing? Like what the heck was he actually talking about in terms of that connection to something within him? What the heck was he talking about? And he said, connection to the whole, you know, to the cosmos. And I think that there's a lot that we miss if we try to over intellectualize or over rationalize things, even though the Greek word rational, I mean, came from logos, right, which is a divine order to the cosmos. It's divine. So anyway, I don't want to speak too much longer. So I just want to throw it out there. My experience has certainly been one with trying to feel what they felt, not necessarily just to know what they wrote. And it's been extremely beneficial so far in so many ways. So I want to throw it over to Leo and Kai. I'll let you guys jump in with, your background to this idea. What does it mean? Where does it come from? And what can it teach us? So whoever wants to jump in first.
I want to let Kai take it actually, because I think he's much more worldly than I am. So I kind of want to hear what he has to say about it.
Yeah, cool.
That was good. You got me that one. So I think I love the way you said that we're not born into it, we're born out of it. I think that changes your whole prospects of how you treat yourself and how you treat those around you and how you treat nature. And I do think that we negate sometimes what is true rationality. So when you were saying about rationality, the alarm bells go, well, we are supposed to be rational creatures. But if we believe that we are not of the world on some level, that we are somehow distinct from it, then what we're using is a false impression of what is rational. So we are called to be incredibly rational. But just from that premise, to think that we are somewhere else separate instead of somehow connected would say, well, if you believe rationality is to be able to separate yourself objectively on some level and not have any emotional integration whatsoever and not have any connection with anything else, just see the facts, not only do you trip over the David Hume fact value distinction, but you trip over your own sense of being. So when people say, when I see atheistic interpretation of Stoicism calling us to be more rational and following the facts, I'm like, well, that doesn't actually make any sense. For the reasons that I said before, previously, like which facts do you want to follow? There's many, many facts that we can look at. But if those facts are not rooted in the logos, in divine reason, as opposed to an overly academic interpretation of reason, then we do separate ourselves. We do cut ourselves off. We do sever ourselves from all that is beautiful. I mean, the logos is also beautiful, right? And we say things like that is a heinous act, that is a crime against nature, right? That's a crime. I've said recently when in the Faroe Islands, they decided to, in my opinion, murder 1,500 dolphins for the crime of swimming nearby. I said that was a crime against the cosmos. So when you start to see those things, you say, okay, who am I? And how can I harmonize? How can I have sympathy? How can I hear the logos or see the logos, or in Leonidas' case, feel when he feels the full force of that weight upon you. And I think when you have a cosmopolitan perspective, that's what you see. And then get to use again, John Peterson, what you look at, what you aim for is what you see, right? So if you're aiming at something else, if you say, no, I want to be scientific, quote unquote, but I'm not going to be scientific in the way Pasidonius is scientific. I'm not going to say that every time I look to the tides and look to the sky and look to my emotional connection, if I'm not going to do that, then I'm not really, from Pasidonius' point of view, looking into the mind of God. And I'm not actually doing science. This is what I think is a wonderful, we're going a little bit into the next 2 weeks, but I think personally for me, that cosmopolis perspective shows me why God is so integral to that. I can't take, personally, to use a Leonidas expression, I can't but plant my flag and say I'm cosmopolitan because I understand that I have the logos inside me and I'm connected to the logos with everybody else who wants to be reasonable until I sever myself. But I think Leonidas can give you a more sort of theoretical grounding as to why, for example, we believe strongly that the environment is part of that cosmopolis.
Right. So I want to add to what Kai's saying. There has been a strain of taking away the logos of Stoicism lately, as Kai was saying, and I completely agree with him in that. I think this is impossible, right? I think it's impossible, for it to still be Stoicism in any conceivable sense, right? And to replace it with something like following the facts, I think it has huge problems. Just if I have to look at it from within my own field of international relations theory, something like this, sometimes a statesman has to look at something and say, well, I don't have all the facts. To some extent, I have to go with my role, my intuition, just a hunch sometimes, like the daimon that Socrates is talking about, right? What is screaming at me not to do? So it's difficult. I think it's impossible to separate this kind of logocentrism from Stoicism. Now, And as you were saying earlier, Simon, about this, the idea of cosmopolitanism, about what is my primary allegiance, the Stoics understood that the allegiances we give ourselves apart from the cosmopolis are arbitrary to some extent. Yes, we have to be born from somewhere, but as the Stoics say, why don't we just call ourselves whatever corner of the room that we were born in, right? We don't do that. We don't give the latitude and longitude and say I'm from that square foot right there. We don't say that. We identify with a larger thing, with something bigger than ourselves. And nation states are a really new thing in the international world, right? And this is to some extent, kind of a bourgeois trick, in the sense that, like, people were starting to read more. People were starting to have like the printing press that they could read in a language, and they don't want to read in Latin anymore, right? They want to read in a language that they speak. So these groups kind of came together and said, well, we speak the same language. We consider ourselves this ethnicity, whatever that's supposed to mean. And then we say, now this is our country, this is our nation state. And entire wars are fought over this. And that's just, on the negative aspect. There's also positive things, presumably, as well, right? But it's still to some extent arbitrary. And to say that this is just a fact of nature isn't true when it comes to our allegiances, right? We had before that, we had several overlapping allegiances in the Middle Ages in Europe, right? And let alone the fact that nation states are imposed on a large majority or a large part of the world's population, right? In Africa and Asia and in Latin America. So this is, here you go, have a nation state, be like us, be like Western Europe, right? So this is to some extent arbitrary, and it is artificial. Even at its best, it's artificial. However, the cosmos doesn't do that, right? Just by virtue of us being reasonable or rational, that is not the kind of thing that allegiance that we can change. To some extent, we can't just say, well, I am no longer a citizen of the world. We do cut ourselves off, but we have to make that conscious decision to cut ourselves off, right? We have to say, well, I'm going to do something unjust. I'm going to do something, I'm not going to treat others as they're in my circles, right? So that to me shows this kind of duality in Stoic political philosophy. So to one extent, we have to act from somewhere, just like we were talking about last time with love, right? The sage has to love from somewhere. So the sage wants his or her beloved to improve, to transcend this love and become a sage themselves, become wise themselves, certainly. So we have to act from somewhere in the cosmopolis as well. So instead of saying, for example, America, right or wrong, we say, well, America is my country, no matter what, but it can be wrong, right? So we can be proud of being who we are, I think the Stoics would say, and some of them certainly were, particularly by the time you get to the Roman Stoics, in a way that the Greek Stoics were not. The Greek Stoics were all foreigners, right? They were all immigrants to Athens, but they still understood, especially by the time of the later Stoics, yes, you have your allegiance to your nation state or to your empire by the time we got into the Roman Empire. And yet we still, by virtue of being human, by virtue of being rational, I should say, because it's not just a human thing for them, that there is something greater than that, and there's something that you owe your greater allegiance to. So first, you're a citizen of the cosmos, right? And after that, you are a citizen of what particular piece of land you claim as your nation state, or claims you as a nation state as well, right?
Yeah, I'm very interested often lately in just these little whispers of Stoicism that you see flowing into the kind of Hellenized Christianity, as it developed. And even that idea that you're speaking about there is, identify with I guess, the cosmos so that you can see even the flaws in, that layer below it, which might be your country that you identify with. And there's obviously that idea that essentially led us to separated, state and church, which was give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, give unto God what is God's, right? And you might say that the Stoics would say, give unto the state what is the state's, but then also give unto the cosmos what is the, it's getting that higher view of everything that's happening on the world. You might say the Marcus Aurelius view from above, right? And sit up there and look down and say, okay, well, To me, I think one of the biggest things that has come from this worldview is just this question of what are we doing here? Just actually kind of like almost sitting above the world and looking down. And I remember having these visions of like, you see humanity kind of like roaming herds around the earth, moving from place to place, nations building, nations dying. Once you start to see that, and I think that what's required for this is an understanding, obviously, of like history and world religions and world philosophies and how they all move about. And once you start to see that, you start to ask the question, yeah, what the hell are we all doing here? And what the Stoics then help us with is to say, okay, well, what is right and wrong? What is worth pursuing and worth avoiding? And I don't think that you can separate those kinds of questions from getting that far back view and actually watching what works and what doesn't. And so there's this interesting idea in Seneca, and maybe you guys could comment on this. He actually believed that by following these kind of Stoic principles and everything, it's funny. This is why I always like cringe when I see people talk about how Stoicism is a godless philosophy. Seneca himself believed that once you get these principles in your mind, you get this understanding. He said, like, you put yourself on the same plane as the gods, right? It's like you start to think with their mind, you start to see with their eyes, you start to hear with their ears, and so I get this idea. It's and I don't know whether that's true yet, but let's say I'm exploring the possibilities. But you start to see things from afar, as if you almost put yourself not as a participant, but as a viewer for a moment, in the same way that Seneca went to the Roman games and he said, I wasn't watching the games in the middle, I was watching the people, trying to figure out what they were doing, why they were here, So I don't know if you guys want to comment on that.
I think having a cosmopolitan ideal, at least the ideal, gives you that moment of pause and to be able to examine something. Where if I'm blinded by, loving my queen, for example, I then can't see where perhaps, the monarchy can be quite, can cause social issues or has done in the past. If I look to, I honestly, I do understand who the queen is, and I understand how important she is to one part of my identity. But on the same level, I understand that she's human and that she's capable of making a mistake. And that's the wonderful thing about being a cosmopolitan, is that you can see the best of humanity in others and you can see the worst of humanity in yourself, and vice versa. Because it's not like, oh my gosh, humans are just, they're just this evil group of people. They're terrible. They're just awful. No, they're just one step away either way. They can always come, if you're rooted in the logos, then of course you want to step towards the logos. But there are moments when you're human and you make a mistake, but you're one step away from self-correction. It's not like, I don't know, something like an original sin, for example, where we're sinful and we're bad. There's nothing we can do, and we must ask for forgiveness and plead for it. It's like, well, actually, just do what's correct. Just do what's correct by taking that step back, by looking at the facts are important. It's not like, okay, you said, Kai, that we shouldn't live according to facts. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that doesn't give us the values. But of course, facts come into it and help us think about what we're going to do. But from taking that sort of God perspective, you say, I'm not favoring anything but reason. That means for example, even when I have a good group of friends, I'm like, yes, you are my friend and I love you dearly and you're really important to me. But actually what you're doing is unreasonable as a group, or what you're doing is unreasonable as individuals, because my allegiance is reason. And if people understand that, then there's no frustration, there's no friction, there's no like, oh, you're not a good friend, Kai, because you're telling me I can't do what I want to do, or you didn't keep that secret from me. I'm like, well, I'm doing what I think is reasonable. And I would think that you'd want to do the same. And I think that that's why it's so fundamental that we don't have an atheistic interpretation of Stoicism as the only interpretation, because which facts again do I take? Why do I consider that fact more important? Of course, you have to live a practical life. When you're going around your country, you have certain obligations. If you're British, you vote in the UK when you have an election. If you value civic participation, so it's not like we're all up in the clouds somewhere either. It's like, yes, I do have some sense of duty to my nation. I mean, Leonidas fought for the values and principles of the US. I'm not saying everything that the US stood for was correct, but the principles that he was standing for were important. And he didn't sit there and go, right, I'm going to forget I'm an American soldier. He could never forget. How would he ever have been able to do that at any moment? But he said to himself, and Relay and I spoke about it, like, first and foremost, I'm a soldier of the cosmos. And then I'm a soldier of the US. And then I'm a soldier of my battalion. And then I don't know if I'm using the right terminology there, but then I'm a soldier for my men and women. And then and that's what it allows us to do. It's a structured thing, yes, but it's layered and it's integrated. Because people think, oh, what happens if I have a conflict? Well, you wouldn't, because it's a present thing. Okay, am I being human? Firstly, if I'm being human, then whatever I do, whatever role I occupy in terms of being a human rooted into the cosmos, whatever I do would be rational and reasonable. Leo, I don't know if you can add to that, particularly from what I was saying. I don't want to put too many words in your mouth about your tours in Iraq.
Sure. No, actually, that was very poetic. I wish I could actually say it like that. Okay, I'm going to actually use that because you're paraphrasing me. I'm going to pretend I said what you said. But absolutely, that's absolutely right. There is this layer of cosmopolitanism that for a Stoic has to basically inform every decision they make to some extent. I mean, it's not always going to be in the forefront of your mind, but you can see this in the roles that Cicero's speaking about, right? When he's paraphrasing Panaetius, or you can see it when they say, okay, first and foremost, I'm a rational human being, and I have to act like a rational human being. Second, I'm a Roman, or I'm an American, or whatever it is we are, right? And then it's a role of my circumstances. Who am I? Am I a ruler? Am I a foot soldier? What am I, right? Am I a private soldier? And then fourth, okay, what is my career what I want my career to be like? So there are these roles, or okay, and it's, when I look at it, it's almost as if a three-dimensional thing, right? If I look at it from where exactly is my decision going to come out of, with these things layered on top of each other. But I also don't want to undermine the very real political aspect of this for the Stoics, right? Remember that these are all foreigners to Athens, the early Stoics, all foreigners to Athens. They didn't have like an Athenian head of the school until much later on in their history, right? So what do they when they're talking about their cosmopolitanism? To them, they are what we would call anarcho-communists, pretty much, or at least they're saying they're in a utopia they would be, right? Now, to me, what's interesting about this is I see echoes of this when they're talking about that customs are irrelevant, when they're talking about that marriage is just traditions that we just say, and then in a utopia, we wouldn't have that, like we talked about last time, or eating human flesh, right? That is nothing necessarily wrong in that. This, to me, has very interesting parallels in the history of international relations. So, for example, really briefly, because I don't want to give a lecture and have everybody fall asleep, right? But there's really fascinating here when, for example, the Spanish are taking the fact that Native Americans allegedly are practicing cannibalism, right? Or they're taking it as a fact, what is allegedly true, whatever. So they're saying that is a justification for war against them, right? That is a jus ad bellum cause, that they can go to war with and kill Native Americans just because of their practice of cannibalism, allegedly. Now, what's interesting about this is that at the time you had Europeans eating momia, right? Which are basically ground up cadavers that they thought would cure every little illness that they had, right? So they're grinding up mummies that they're importing into a dust and putting that in their drink and drinking that down, but they're killing the Indians for eating human flesh, which is an irony of history. It's not, and you get people from the Salamanca school, the scholars of the Salamanca school, some like De las Casas, for example, saying like, no, this is wrong. Like, cannibalism is not a reason for the Spanish, for us to kill the Native Americans over. That these are just practices that they have, right? So I find that interesting that with the Stoics, I mean, surely they couldn't have imagined the founding of the New World or anything like that, but imagine like them saying, incest or eating human flesh, these things have been rejected without good reason. And then it's, thousands of years later, you have someone from a Catholic of the Salamanca school, clergyman, saying, yes, eating human flesh is not a reason to go to war with people, right? So I think the Stoics were very their foundation on this, the indifference of social customs, that at the end of the day, this is indifferent to who we really are, because reason is our primary allegiance, and it's what we really are, I think is very important for political philosophy, right?
It's almost sounding to me like they were the original postmodernists. I don't know how I feel about
Maybe.
that, but you know, what I'm hearing in this kind of this worldview of, you know, kind of sitting above all of these sorts of things that we engage with in our lives, whether it is duty to your country or cannibalism, say, is finding a deeper grounding with truth, almost, you know, identifying with something that that includes everything that we see and experience in our world. And to me, this seems it seems particularly prevalent. I think you can really see this. I'm sure all of you have had this experience, like, and maybe Kai and Leo, you could comment on this, but I've been watching a lot of debates lately about God between atheists and Christians, or atheists and religious folk. And one of the things that I've really noticed, and I have noticed this a couple of times, enough for me to actually notice it in Dawkins and in I think it's Matt Delaney, I believe. But I've seen both of them have moments in debates where the other side offers them something perfectly reasonable as an objection to their views, offers them something very interesting as a thought, at least to give you pause and to think, oh, maybe that could change the way I think about this. But I've seen enough times to notice that they'll pass it off, like, in a really uncomfortable way, in the same way that you might pass off something if your wife or husband says something about you that you really find uncomfortable. You just don't want to deal with it right now. You know, like something about your belief. And I see that, I think, of course, because if you go and you write 2 or 3 books on atheism, what are the chances that you're going to be convinced otherwise? If you go, yeah, if your allegiance is to that God, right? If God is the grounding of your beliefs and values, and your grounding of your beliefs and values is in this atheistic interpretation, then when somebody has a reasonable argument against you and you've written 2 or 3 books, you're not going to just concede, because that's the level to which you're willing to see truth, right? But in the Stoic sense, they say, no, okay, we need a higher and then a higher and then a higher and then a higher level of abstraction here in order to see that there's always something that we don't quite understand. And I wonder if you know, I always go back to Seneca because I've been studying him a lot lately. And, you know, in his first letter, in his Natural Questions, he literally writes that, you know, if he had not started to kind of unfold the mysteries of the universe and started to question God and question, these sorts of questions around God and the cosmos and well, yeah, that. He said his life would not have been worth living, right? So this is Seneca who's saying, like, these sorts of questions made my life worth something. And so I wonder if a part of this is also just getting us to come to terms with the very mysterious nature of the world, so that we don't immediately jump to conclusions like so many of us do. Do you think that there's an element of that?
I mean, yes. I mean, I don't see the Stoics as postmodernists, because there is an objective truth. That's why it's so important that we don't live according to facts, because then Richard Dawkins will be able to say, well, this is the fact that's most important, and be able to pass something off, right? So I don't think they're postmodernists in the sense that it depends, because they'll say, well, the truth depends on the perspective and the observation point of the person standing there. And the Stoics will say, no, it will depend on the logos. We should all be standing in the logos, and therefore we should all come to reason. That's why we don't have anything but natural law. So, well, who makes the rules? We do. We do. Like, people are like, oh my gosh, like the Stoics are saying that some sages should come down and tell us what to do. No, if we were sages, we would understand why they have that reasoning. So it's not postmodernist at all. It sounds like it, and it is a criticism, but it's actually saying this is why the logos is so fundamental. That's the perspective you have to take. That's why you can't say, well, from my atheistic interpretation, I've sold 3 books and I have a vested interest in continuing this narrative. The logos doesn't give us the ability to do that. Because say your primary allegiance is to reason. The minute you realize you're wrong, you have to stop. It is no longer appropriate for you to hold a position. This is why I love the cosmopolitan point of view, because you say, well, how do I know whether I'm being reasonable or not? Well, you listen to others, you hear the other side. You don't plant your flag until you've been thinking a lot. A lot of people like misquote Seneca all the time, say, they're our guides, not our masters. But he says only after you've studied the principles of Stoicism, you can therefore you would be able to detect, where the truth lies. It's not like, oh well, I'm just going to throw caution to the wind, just go wherever I want to go. Well, when I have a problem with a car, I go to a mechanic. I don't go to someone that hasn't been trained. I need to train myself in philosophy, and the part of that is removing the training where I have a vested interest in any particular position other than reason. And I think that's why we need to be very careful to say it's not that the Stoics would say that all cultures are equally truthful and equally right and equally appropriate, right? So if there's one culture that does cannibalism because that's what they think will appease the gods, Seneca's already said this is not the Stoic God. He was very clear on this fact. Like if you're having to cut an arm off or a leg off, or you're having to throw bodies to make a bloodthirsty God happy, I'm paraphrasing of course, then you've lost the logos. So it's not that we find everything acceptable depending on which corner somebody happened to be born at. It's like, well, does that sound reasonable? And then because we're all called to reason, that's that point. So yes, we all come together, but it's not postmodernism in that sense. It's not like there's no objective, there's no truth. It always depends on the person. That's why we don't say, for example, power is terrible. So, well, what is the power being used for? We don't see everything as a nail that needs to be hammered, because they say, well, it could be power. It could be that power is corrupt, but it could be that power is useful. What is the power being used for? Because otherwise you start to say, well, all power is wrong, or this kind of power is wrong. So, well, it depends. It will always depend. Leo, I don't know if you want to add to that and then contrast with, say, Diogenes's concept of cosmopolitanism.
Right, sure. So there's actually a few really good points that you brought up, and but just to add to your view about postmodernism, it's absolutely right. Foucault. I know Eric's listening. I have two French names. I'm going to slaughter them. It's making me very uncomfortable that he's listening, but he can correct me on this later. Okay. So Foucault. I gave my best shot to Eric. I'm sorry. Right. So Foucault is reading Seneca, and he gives a very postmodern reading of Seneca. Right. Whereas another one, Pierre Hadot, is critiquing Foucault, right, and saying that what Foucault is doing wrong when he's reading Seneca is that he's taking this kind of concept that Seneca says that you have to kind of find your own nature, you have to find your own path, and he's taking that to mean, Foucault is taking that to mean that there is no truth or there is no reality. It's just like what the world as you make it, right? And Hadot is saying like, no, like as Kai is saying here, no, there is that is not what Seneca's saying. Seneca's saying, and it has a different point. Sure, we got to live the world from somewhere, right? We got to find our path in this world. But to say that every way we live it is equally good, and no matter how we create ourselves, it's equally good as any other way we create ourselves, absolutely not, right? And also to add to Kai's point about external reality, I've been working on this quite a bit. This is actually part of my dissertation, and Grotius, right, who is reading the Stoics and who quotes the Stoics tremendously, he kind of separates internal justice from external justice. So roughly, if we want to say external justice in international law is or any law really, is something like the rules, the norms, right, the laws of communities, or interstate activity, that we can call that external justice, right? Those are the laws, don't jaywalk, whatever laws you want to take. But the Stoics' point seems to be a different one. The Stoics have a type of internal justice, right? You get this from their virtue ethics. So not every piece of external law do you have to follow. The only ones that are appropriate to follow is if they match up to natural law, to the logos, right? So if the one true law is natural law, like Cicero, I think, puts it most concisely, right? So it's a natural law, which is synonymous with the moral law. This is a law that tells us what to do, tells what is permissible, what is prohibited, and what is obligatory. Now, external laws, they should match up to this. They should, but they're not going to, at least not all the time. So we sometimes have to follow them, if it is reasonable to do so, and sometimes we have to not follow them and take the punishment, right? If that is also reasonable to do it, right? So, I'm with Kai on this one. That's not postmodernism. It can't possibly be, because postmodernism is a movement that came particularly rejecting grand narratives, Stoicism among them, right? But the Stoics' point is something like the ancient world might have seen as, or did see as, completely radical, right? Where you have this thing that what our traditions are indifferent, our laws are indifferent. There's only there's only the cosmos. Like, this is completely radical. In fact, you have later Stoics, like we talked about last time, Athenodorus, bowdlerizing these things. Like, no, we can't have people read this. And the Stoics themselves. I think this is in Diogenes Laertius, but he says the Stoics have teachings that they don't tell the students right away because they're not ready to accept them. And we see this, I mean, at first glance, this is almost like Scientology, right? With they don't tell you about the aliens until you've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars or whatever, right? But in another sense, this is a Stoic saying, like, look, if you do this badly, then you are going to say, oh, well, a community of wives, count me in, right? And Epictetus is discussing exactly this. He's like, yeah, but you have to behave as if you're in a banquet in this life, right? You're not there by yourself to grab as much as you can. You're there when it comes in front of you, you take it. And when it passes by, okay, you wait for the next round, right? So the cosmos, to some extent, I think this is beautiful, is like a banquet. You're not there by yourself. Like, there's you eating a microwave dinner. If you're anything like me, let me let you guys into my life a little bit. If something like you're eating a microwave dinner in front of TV in one sense, right, in your underwear, and there's another sense you're at a banquet, right, and a celebration. And one of these is your individual culture, individual traditions, and another one is this cosmopolis that you share with everyone else, and that is your primary. That's the best you, right? That's your primary allegiance, right? And certainly, to add to Kai's point about Diogenes the cynic, right? I think that's Diogenes the cynic, not Diogenes Laertius, right? Okay. This is a different type of cosmopolitan. This is probably the early. It's attributed to Socrates, but really it's Diogenes who really says, you can't tell me what to do. Like, I'm not an Athenian, I'm not Sinopian, I'm not Spartan. You can't tell me what to do because I'm a citizen of the cosmos. And Diogenes was kind of the king of the one-liners, right? He got that there were differences between city-states. There's a beautiful line of his somewhere. He says, someone asks him, what city or what city-state has real men in it, right? And he says, real men nowhere, but real boys at Sparta, right? So even the Spartans don't make the cut, but they're the ones that are real boys, right? Whatever that's supposed to mean, right? Or he says somewhere else that walking from Athens to Sparta is like walking in a mansion from the women's quarters to the men's quarters, right? So Diogenes understood that there were differences. He liked some better than others, but he didn't pledge allegiance to anything. And there's another story of his where King Philip, right? King Philip of Macedon is visiting because he just took over almost all of Greece, right? So he's visiting. I think this is Corinth at the time, where Diogenes is living, and everybody's running around like a chicken with their head cut off, like, "Oh my goodness, Philip's going to be here. We have to make everything look amazing, right?" And Diogenes starts getting out and moving his tub that he lives in from one side of the street to the other, right? Pointlessness. And they're like, what are you doing? And he's like, everybody else is doing something for no reason, right? That's what I'm doing too, right? Just show you people how stupid you are, right? So in one sense, this guy, he's brilliant. I love this guy. But in one sense, Diogenes is saying, like, yes, there are differences. Not all city-states are created equal. Some are better at some stuff than others, right? He was a big fan of Sparta, even though it's unclear that he'd ever been there, right? He lived at Athens and Corinth. And still, he was not willing to pledge allegiance to any of them. He'd been kicked out of Sinope, right, because his father was defacing the currency. And he says himself, like, when people ask him, what is your philosophy all about? I'm here to deface the currency. I'm here to show you that your money is counterfeit. Just like he got kicked out of Sinope because his father allegedly had been making counterfeit money. That's what he came to do with his philosophy. I came to show you that your money's counterfeit, right? All these things you think are important aren't. Right? Yes, there are differences. Yes, some are better than others. But at the end of the day, right, the only thing that we pledge allegiance to are the sky, the earth, right, the world, because that's where we're really from. At least if you're Diogenes, right?
Yeah, I love Diogenes. I think that he's got some of the funniest stories, even just, walking around in the middle of the day with a lamp, searching for a good man, you know. It's like, by the way, Kai, when I'm over in California and you're there too, we're so doing that. we're going around the street with a lamp.
Or we're stealing we're still a bathtub and we push that from one side to the other.
Yeah.
Hollywood Way should be the way to do that.
Yes. Oh man. Okay, so look, I'm gonna throw it over to. I'm gonna go throw you guys to the wolves now. We're gonna ask some questions in the group. But thank you so much for this. And by the way, once we've finished our talk next time on God, we're then starting another masterclass series. It's $80,000, but we're going to tell you all the stuff that we haven't yet told you yet that you need to know to become true Stoics. So that's what we're going to be doing. Anybody who's listening on the podcast, you can find the rest of this conversation, patreon.com/Simon J.E. Drew. Hey there, YouTubers. I just wanted to let you know that if you love this episode and you'd like many more just like it, then you can head to patreon.com/Simon J.E. Drew. There you'll get access to exclusive episodes that haven't been released yet, as well as many other benefits. Also, if you'd like to work one-on-one with me in my coaching practice, then you can head to simonjedrew.com/coaching. Talk to you soon.